Hello, and welcome to another episode of Steph's Test Kitchen. Today, we'll be making one of the easiest bread recipes ever. Stay tuned. So what you're going to need for this recipe is some salted butter for the savory, unsalted butter for the sweet. You're going to need some whole milk, some daisy sour cream, all-purpose flour, eggs, your choice of grated cheese. I'm using a combination of a Mexican blend cheese and an Asiago Parmesan cheese. You're going to need some baking powder and baking soda, and then some salt, which is not just for flavor, but it also helps with the development of the bread structure itself. The savory calls for some black pepper, as well as they call for cayenne, but for those of you who don't like a spicy element to your bread, I like paprika because it gives you an incredible rich flavor without that heat. My mouth! You're also going to need 2 baking tins. We're going to use one for the savory and one for the sweet. You're going to need to cover them, spread them with some butter so that the bread doesn't stick to the pan. And then you're also going to need some mixing bowls, one for the dry ingredients, one for the wet ingredients, some measuring cups and assorted size teaspoons, as well as some whisks. When you're baking, it's really important to grease the pan before you put the dough in so that during the baking process, the dough doesn't stick to the pan. So I just take a very thin slice of butter, put it in my pan, and then I find the easiest way to maneuver it around the entire pan is with a paper towel. So I just fold up a paper towel and get the butter in all the nooks and crannies on the flat side of the pan as well as on the edges, so that when the bread rises, it's not going to stick. So to begin the dry ingredients, we're going to need 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. So we're just going to measure that out. And the important thing with baking is to be precise, or as precise as possible with your measurements, because unlike cooking, baking is a science. And I wasn't very good at science in school, so I try to follow the directions as closely as possible. So once you add the flour, then you're going to add the salt. Now this recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of salt. And again, the salt is not just for flavor, but it also does something scientifically to develop the bread structure. So we add the salt. And then the bread recipe also calls for black pepper. Now they only called for 1/4 teaspoon, but I really like that black pepper flavor with the cheese, because I think it just balances the saltiness of the cheese. So I went ahead and put 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper into my mixture. And then the last dry ingredient was the paprika. You can use cayenne, but again, I like paprika. So another 1/2 teaspoon, which, well, mistakes happen. So I'm going to estimate that what spilled out is about 1/2 teaspoon and just put the rest back. No harm, no foul. Again, this is why I'm glad I didn't use cayenne, because that would be extremely hot. But instead, the paprika just gives it a great flavor. So, I'm going to put that back, and now we're going to add our cheese. Well, nope, never mind. First, we're going to whisk it. And this is to just evenly distribute all those flavors throughout the flour. Now we're going to add the cheese. So again, I'm adding a mixture of a Mexican blend, which is primarily cheddar. And I'm just going to add about 1/2 cup of the cheddar cheese and then 1/2 cup of the Asiago cheese. Now you add the cheese to the dry ingredients because you want to coat it with the flour so that it doesn't stick together in gobs in the dough.
So this helps you get an even dispersion of the cheese. But you also want to set aside some cheese and not use the whole package because you're going to need it to coat the bottom of the tray and decorate on the top of the dough before you put it in the oven. Here's me figuring out, oh, I don't need the baking soda after all, but I do need a teaspoon of baking powder. So that's all the dry ingredients, and then we're going to just whisk that together and prepare to make the wet ingredient mixture. Now to mix the wet ingredients, we're going to start with a cup of whole milk. So I'm using a half cup measuring cup because I had already used the full cup for something else, so I'm just going to double my pour. So that is a cup of whole milk. And then we're going to follow that with our sour cream. So the recipe calls for half a cup of sour cream, which I did not realize until I measured it out how sticky sour cream is. It does not easily fill the cup. So, and again, because this is a science, you need to get it as close as possible. So that's 1/4 cup going into the wet mixture, and then we do it again. And that is almost another full 1/4 cup. So we're going to add that into our whole milk and try to get every last drop out. And while ordinarily I do like to lick my fingers when I bake, I cannot stand sour cream, so I will wipe that off. Alright, next we're going to add 1 egg to the mixture. So these are my bougie Happy Chicken Farm Fresh Free Range eggs from Whole Food that I love. So that's 1 egg. It's important to always wash your hands when fooling with raw eggs so you don't contaminate anything. So once I add the eggs, now I'm going to add my unsalted butter. And the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons of melted unsalted butter. So I'm going to take my stick of butter, which is already sort of pre-measured for the 3 tablespoons, and I'm going to just cut it into thin slices so that it takes less time to melt. Put it in a glass bowl or something that is okay to go into the microwave. And it's going to go in the microwave for about 30 seconds. So we'll be right back. So after 30 seconds in the microwave, I'm going to just mix any still lumps of the butter together so that it's nice and liquidy, and pour that into the rest of the wet ingredients. Now we're going to just whisk this all together and use a different whisk than you do with the dry ingredients, because again, you don't want to cross-contaminate especially any of the germs potentially from the eggs. So always use 1 set of utensils for wet ingredients and 1 set of utensils for dry ingredients. So now you take your wet and your dry ingredients and you just fold the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients.
Is to fold in the cheese. What does that mean?
This is how you fold in the cheese. You pour a little bit of your mixture and just kind of use the spatula to make a folding motion until it is incorporated throughout. And then you add a little bit more of your wet mixture. Keep folding it until the wet mixture is all fully incorporated into the dry mixture. It's not rocket science. Now we're going to put some cheese on the bottom of our baking tin, just so it gives it that nice cheesy crust. Just put a thin layer all across the bottom of the tin, like that. Now we're going to pour our dough into the tin. And it's okay that it's kind of thick and sticky, but we're just gonna evenly disperse this now and use our spatula to work it into the corners and kind of get a nice flat texture. You don't want to overwork the dough, but you do want to make sure that it is sitting fully in the tin. We're now going to put our dough into the oven at 350 on just regular bake for a good 30 minutes. We're now going to get started on our sweet bread. So we're going to chop some pecans. You can use walnuts if you like, but I really love the buttery quality that pecans have. And I'm just going to scoop out about a cup of them and put them on my chopping board and just rough cut them. They don't have to be the perfect consistent shape or size, but you just want pieces, not the big whole pecan. So I'm just going to run my knife through them just like so. Once you're finished with your pecans, I'm going to open my dried apricot bag and put some of these on my chopping board. And I'm just going to kind of chop these into quarters. Again, I want everything rather bite-sized. So I'm just going to turn them lengthways and then widthwise and chop them into quarters. Once I finish with my dried apricots, I'm going to add the last component, which is going to be the raisins. So I'm just going to dump those. Since those are already bite-sized, there's no need to chop them any smaller. So depending on if you like a lot of fruits and nuts in your bread or a little, I tend to like a lot of fruits and nuts in my bread, so I'm going to add a liberal amount. Again, we're going to grease our baking tin so that the bread doesn't stick. We're going to mix our dry ingredients together, but instead of the pepper, we're going to use some cinnamon and pumpkin spice mixture. And then we're also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla to our wet ingredients so that it tempers the sourness of the sour cream. And then, of course, we fold in the wet ingredients into the dry.
If you say fold in one more time.
We're going to put our new bread into the oven, and as we do, we're going to turn our existing cheese loaf 180 degrees so that it bakes evenly. So we're going to just turn it like that and put our new dough in, and we're going to check them both in 30 minutes. So for the cinnamon raisin apricot bread, I'm going to show you how to do an egg wash. So you're going to crack an egg into a glass bowl. You're going to add 2 teaspoons of water to the bowl, just like so. 1 and 2. And then we're just going to whisk it together with a spoon. And what that's going to do is when you brush it on your loaf, it's going to give it a very nice shine. It just makes it look a little bit more professional. So we're going to get a brush and just liberally brush our egg wash onto the top of the loaf. So this loaf has already been in there for about 30 minutes. So we've taken it out and are brushing our egg wash on it, and then we're going to stick it back in the oven for another 20-30 minutes until it is completely baked throughout. So as we put our cinnamon apricot raisin bread back into the oven, we can see that our Asiago cheese loaf is done. So we're going to take that out of the oven, and I'm going to show you how to test for doneness. You're going to take a toothpick, stick it all the way into the bread, and if it comes out clean, it's done. So we're going to take our loaves out, take them out of the tin, and we're going to let them cool on a baking rack. Now this is extremely important. I know it's tempting to cut into a nice hot loaf of bread straight from the oven, but you need at least 3 hours for the bread to cool on the cooling rack so that it helps the protein structure just solidify. And of course we are going to check for no soggy bottoms, as the British would say. So we're going to just leave that here for 3 hours. Now we're going to cut into that Asiago cheese loaf. Listen to that crust. Ugh, it looks and smells and sounds so good. Cut some nice thick slices. We're not going to skimp on this good bread. So now I'm going to finally taste our Asiago cheese loaf and our dried apricot, raisin, and pecan cinnamon loaf. I'm so excited. Let's go ahead and take a piece of the Asiago cheese bread first and just put a little bit of butter on it because butter always tastes so good on fresh baked bread. That's really good. It's got a beautiful crust to it. And it's moist, it hasn't dried out. And you get that saltiness from the cheese. You get a little bit of that pepper and paprika that just gives some depth of flavor. That is a winner. All right, let's try our sweet bread. Put a little butter on this. Yum. I'm actually very excited about this. Cinnamon raisin is one of my favorite breads, bagels, and so to kind of kick it up a notch with the apricots and the pecans, I'm really excited about this. That's the winner, in my opinion. Our dried apricot, raisin, and walnut bread has come out so beautiful. Look at the even distribution of nuts and fruits throughout the loaf. And that egg wash just kind of gives it a little bit of a shininess, but it is so moist and really delicious. I hope you enjoyed these easy to make bread recipes. Please be sure to comment on which one was your favorite. And thanks for watching. If you want to see more mediocrely shot cooking videos with delicious recipes, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Steph's Test Kitchen, and like my page on Facebook, also Steph's Test Kitchen. Hope to see you next time.